Welcome, everyone. I think folks are trickling in, so just going to give everyone a second. So exciting to see the numbers going up. We are very excited to be hosting this panel this evening, Transforming Hollywood, Resources for a Safer Industry After, in quotation marks, #MeToo. We're going to get started with some intros, just to make sure everybody knows each other, and then just to get us on a sort of schedule for folks that like to know what's coming up. We do have some prepared questions for the panelists. If at any point one of the attendees have a question, please feel free to use the Q&A feature on Zoom. For this session, we don't have the chat feature activated. We really want to encourage people to send the questions in through Q&A. But without further ado, let's get started with introductions. So I'll get us going. My name is Guadalupe Arellanes. I am a helpline advocate with WIF. And I have been working with WIF as a helpline advocate since 2019, very early on in the helpline's inception. So if any of you have ever called the helpline, there is a strong likelihood that we have spoken. Before working at WIF, I do have over 5 years of experience working with survivors of sexual assault, human trafficking, domestic violence, and similar issues. I am going to go ahead and pass it on just based on who's next on my screen. And then we can maybe just do a quick little popcorn. So next for me is Sarah Ann Masse, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Ann Masse. I am an actor, writer, filmmaker. I'm a survivor, one of the first women to come forward about Weinstein, a proud member of WIF, and I run a nonprofit organization called Hire Survivors Hollywood. We exist to advocate for equitable employment opportunities for survivors in the entertainment industry while also creating safer and more equitable work environments for everybody. This organization came out of my own experience. After coming forward, I was retaliated against in my career and found out that this sort of implicit and explicit retaliation was happening to a lot of people. So we have been around for about 5 years now, and we've been really instrumental in helping to get survivors job opportunities on all sorts of different projects. And we have a lot of free resources, which I'm excited to talk about. And I'm just so pleased to be here. I also just want to say, even though all of us on this call are really good about being trauma informed and sensitive, things may come up that are activating or triggering to you. And so if you need to step away, get a glass of water, make sure you're taking care of yourself. And I understand this is being recorded and will be available to watch later. So just make sure you're taking care of yourself through this whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah Ann. And yes, thank you for the reminder that this is being recorded. So even though we don't have the chat feature enabled and there wouldn't be any identifiable information, nonetheless, like if you do need to step away, we will have the rest of the video available so you can get filled in on that information. Next is Lilly.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this process, to sharing a little bit about the work that I've been doing. Lilly Rivera, my pronouns are she, ella, they, and I currently work for MyConnext, and I am the ombuds, the inaugural ombuds. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But for the last 2 years, I've been working with Hollywood Commission as Director of Education and Evaluation, learning about the issues that are impacting workers within the community and creating solutions, responses to those issues that are presented. And My Connect is one of those responses. And before that, before I came to the West Coast, I spent about 2 decades working and centering the lives of LGBTQ BIPOC young people and looking at systems that impact their lives and shifting those to be more responsive and inclusive of who they are. So excited to be here and excited to learn from everyone.
Thank you, Lilly. Next up is Erin.
Hi, everybody. My name is Erin Tillman, she, her pronouns. I am a certified sex educator and a certified intimacy coordinator for TV and film. I've been in the TV film industry in front of and behind the camera for 20 years. I've been in the realm of relationships, sex, education, etc. for over a decade. So when the position of intimacy coordination came about, I was like, wow, this is literally everything I've been doing together. It's great. I also, it's interesting, Lupe mentioned working with survivors. I actually was a survivor advocate with a program called Strength United through Cal State Northridge for about a year. The training through that was really interesting, and that really jump-started me wanting to do a lot more around trauma training. I got a DEI-B, the B is belonging, certification through Pepperdine. The pandemic was a great time to get a lot of certifications. So yeah, you know, I feel like at this point I've dedicated my whole career to helping people live their truth safely and connect with others. And then, you know, the blessing of working in Hollywood too, and being able to help people do that safely in these realms as well through intimacy scenes, etc., is awesome. And I feel very honored to be a part of this industry. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Erin. And last but not least, Suzannah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Suzannah Rogan, she, her pronouns as well. I am a senior training and technical assistance specialist with the Workplace and Economic Justice team at Futures Without Violence. So that is a lot of words to say that I work to support workplaces to implement gender-based violence and harassment training, prevention, and response, really looking at kind of the full ecosystem of the workplace. I have a background in theater, but I also have a gender media culture master's degree where I focused on masculinity studies. So this is a particular area of interest for me because we're so often asking people to rely on the stories, on their own histories, while they are telling the stories of other people. And so for me, it's really important that that be a safer and trauma-informed space for individuals to work in. So I'm very excited to be here. And I also have a lot of free resources that I can provide as well.
Thank you. And I'll just go ahead and state once again for any folks that may have joined us a little later, if you do have questions at any point for any or all of our panelists, please go ahead and use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom. We're going to start with just some kicking off questions. We really were excited about having this panel. WIF, you know, our work, we advocate for and advance the careers of women, non-binary, and trans people working in the screen industries to achieve parity and transform culture. But of course, we don't do that alone. So we rely on and we love fostering relationships with the folks on the screen today, sharing panel space with me, as well as others. And so we were talking about, like many people are, what is the state of Me Too, what has actually been achieved, what has not been achieved, and realized that there was just a lot of knowledge that we collectively wanted to share and conversations that are necessary to have in public spaces. So to get us started, I will just ask, like, how are people feeling about the state of safe work? And if you feel comfortable, Lilly, I would ask you if you want to start by setting some of the context around. I know that recently you helped compile research that specifically looks at what has changed and what hasn't changed as a result of #MeToo and the movement.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the sort of first tasks that the Hollywood Commission, when we were founded in 2017, took on. In order to be in community with folks, you need to ask them, right? What's going on? How do you feel? What is the climate within entertainment? And we were able to do that. And in 2019, 2020, published the first comprehensive report. There were about 10,000 respondents. We've done that again, 2022, 2023. We continue to learn significant things from the community. And I think one of the big takeaways is that only 31% of folks believe that powerful abusers will be held accountable, right? So we know that things have not shifted significantly since 2017. We know people equate power with the ability to just do whatever and not be held accountable, which is incredibly problematic, right? What we also learned was that there was an increase in awareness. So people's awareness increased around what retaliation is, how to place reports. They learned about those mechanisms, and really important, like what's inappropriate in the workplace. And I think it speaks to the culture of entertainment. It is not a typical office that people walk into, right? Most of entertainment spaces are not the corporate space. And this is a different environment that people are functioning. They're talking about different things. The content requires that people share different parts of who they are. And so I think that we have a significant learning curve. So when we're working towards cultural change, awareness is one of the first places we do want to see change, right? So we're on a trajectory, but in terms of behavior and attitudes, that's where we need to focus our energy, because there weren't significant changes. And I'll share some of what we learned. For the most part, people did not feel that we have had some progress since Me Too around power imbalances or power abuses. In 2020, it was about 52% believed that it was minimal to no progress, and today it's 56, right? So that sort of stayed static. I spoke a little bit about accountability, and I think there's nuanced differences based on who you are, right? Men believe that people will be held accountable more often than women do, right? Which is an interesting thing for us to talk about. There are lots of reasons why people did not report, right? Confidentiality, believing that it would not be kept confidential, nothing's going to be done, retaliation, I'm going to be labeled difficult to work with, was a huge response for folks. And we know that when retaliation happens, such as Sarah Ann shared earlier, it impacts people's economy, right? And folks also, and retaliation, regardless of whether it happens and we can quantify it and see it, the belief that it will happen because it's real to people has increased. So in 2020, 21% of people feared retaliation. This time around, it was 33%, right? So people have been seeing it in the industry. One when we're talking about sexual harassment, interestingly enough, men report being exposed to sexual content in the workplace at pretty similar rates than women do. And we also looked at lived experiences, right? Cis white men experience the entertainment industry very different than everybody else. They're very optimistic and they're positive. They feel that harassment has been like prevented. They feel like they reported that abuse of power has been confronted at higher rates than everybody else. And that promoting respect is something that happens often. I also want to bring up, besides sort of around race and gender, also people with disabilities have significant disparities that they're navigating in the industry. And that's really important that we acknowledge. People with disabilities very often reported 41% unwanted sexual attention, sexual coercion at 24%, when the rest of the population was about 13%. So it's really significant that when we think about this moment and we think about where we're going, right? Because we need to acknowledge that there has been something that's happened, and it's nowhere near where it's acceptable, right? There's a lot of work to be done, and moments like this create community, and we're much more effective as community, right? And we saw that during the strikes. We saw people coming in. I'm not a writer, but I'm going to be there for the writers. I'm not an actor, but I'm going to be there for the actors. Now, how do we take this and really solidify? We're not post Me Too. We're in the thick of it. So what's next?
Yeah, and if I can just piggyback on what Lilly was saying, I mean, one data point that's been the Hollywood Commission and WIF doing different surveys and gathering different information has been really helpful to us in the work that we're doing. We're a survivor-run organization. We serve the survivor community, but half of what we do is that we work with industry stakeholders, the people who are making decisions, who are funding things, who are hiring people. And so when we have this data, it's really tangible information that we can take to stakeholders to convince them that not only is this a continuing problem, it hasn't gotten better, and we can do something about it. So 75% of respondents to the Hollywood Commission's survey stated that they faced retaliation when reporting workplace issues. So it's a really real thing that's still happening. And what I've found hopeful, and this may be luck of the draw, potentially people who are taking meetings with our organization are already companies or individuals who are open to this kind of conversation. But when we're able to talk to these stakeholders about the impact this is having, and not just sort of like the ethical impact on the people who are being harmed, but also the bigger impact on the industry as a whole, the financial impact and the productivity impact, they are starting to, I think, understand why this is an issue that requires more than education and conversation, and actually requires tangible action. So I think's really great about this gathering of people is, we're a partner org with WIF. We've worked really closely with the Hollywood Commission. Futures Without Violence has come on board with us to build custom trainings for the entertainment industry. And there's so much knowledge and resource sharing that's going on when we have these communications and when we work together as a group, that's where the tangible action happens. That's where the change happens. And we're a little microcosm of that on this panel, but everybody who's in this room right now or listening to this recording later, like, you all have your communities and you all have your experiences. And by coming together and sharing those things, you also have that power to change it. Whether you're somebody who is on the disempowered side of the power imbalance or on the empowered side of the power imbalance, you all have a role to play in helping to change this. And especially folks who don't hold power, like, come to our organizations, come to us as individuals, because we have those tools that can help you become more empowered, show you what your rights are, and give you sort of a path forward to participating in an industry that does recognize how inequitable things are and what it looks like to be multiply marginalized, and how to actually, like, throughout the entire production process, implement changes that start shifting away from that and start becoming more inclusive and safer.
Lily, I think one of the things that you brought up is you really tried to highlight the differences between white cis men and everyone else. And I think that as I was thinking about this question in particular and creating, safer workplaces, one of the things that kept coming back to me is that the people who are making the decisions are the ones who are having the time of their lives, essentially, who are experiencing the industry as this amazing, collaborative, and safe environment. And so I started thinking about how can we tell them essentially, like, we can give them this data about how survivors are experiencing things and what the view is, but I also think there's information around like the actual business case too to be said here, which for those white cis men who are optimistic might actually be the best route in terms of that. And I just wanted to bring in some. There was a 2005 study in Maine done with perpetrators of intimate partner violence. And what they found is that nearly 20% of those perpetrators, which typically I would use person who causes harm, but we'll talk about that a little later, but this is the actual language from the study, so I want to use that. They found that 20% almost caused a serious accident at work because of distractions. They also found that 48% of the offenders who were surveyed had difficulty concentrating at work. And so when you tie that to the fact that 27% of workplace violent incidents are domestic violence related, and you start to shift and focus on here are the safety issues that this person is causing that are kind of that higher level, like they are going to impact the entire workplace, they are going to impact the entire production. You start to shift away from having to use people's stories and try to get empathy from people who are not necessarily going to buy into that to, okay, here's your business case. I am not going to reduce survivors down to numbers, but what I'm going to tell you is about the safety implications that you are going to have if you keep this person employed on this project. So that was kind of as I was thinking about this question in particular, it's how do we shift because what happens is if a production gets, shut down or people start leaving, the survivor is always going to be blamed if we're always talking about it in terms of how many survivors are here or what is the impact on survivors. And maybe if we shift a little bit and say, no, this person is causing this problem, and here's how big and wide that problem is, that also allows us to take some pressure off survivors to come forward all the time and constantly retell their stories.
Yeah. And I think another way to frame it, I think, first of all, in my experience, that's been really true, is finding ways to reach people. Like I'm a storyteller, right? So you have to find the way to communicate these ideas to people that will actually land. And that's a really compelling part of the story for people who may not have a connection to the survivor element themselves. But another thing I've found really helpful, and this is maybe jumping ahead a little bit to talk about some of what we do and the programs that we offer, but one of the things that we do quite extensively is we do these comprehensive consultations with people who are putting together a film or a television show, whether that's an indie or a studio partnership or whatever it might be. And one of the things that we do as an organization is start to look ahead at where problems might come up and help prevent these problems from happening in the first place. Obviously, that has an overall positive benefit because we're creating safer environments for everybody to be in, but we're also helping the productions to avoid PR nightmares, liability issues. And our take on it is that the more you are inclusive of survivors and the more you have people in your work environments who are not the perpetrators themselves, the better that work environment is going to be for everybody. We can't guarantee that there isn't going to be somebody hired who is problematic and it hasn't been made public yet or does something on set that makes people feel unsafe. But what we're trying to do is provide these production companies and these producers and studios and filmmakers with tools to prevent harm from happening in the first place and actually having a plan in place if something comes up, to deal with it in a way that is trauma-informed, survivor-centric, sensitive to the needs of the people who are actively being harmed, and trying to prevent any further harm from happening. So there's a lot of positivity in the idea of being inclusive of survivors. And I think that kind of narrative shift is really important too, because there has been this cultural narrative that survivors are to blame for bringing down your favorite director or telling you not to listen to your favorite musician. And like Suzannah was saying, like, it's not actually on the survivors. And we don't want to have to be in a situation where people are constantly having to put their necks on the line in order to stop this from happening. So we're trying to empower the people who create the environment in the first place to prevent harm from happening, but also bring in people who are beneficial to the environment and help shift the culture to be a more positive and inclusive one in the first place. And I think that's a really exciting path to walk down, and one that our partner companies have been really gratified by and had really positive experiences with. So, like, just a reminder, I think a lot of people who are listening right now probably are survivors, and you hold intrinsic value as people anyway, but your experience does not make you problematic or difficult. It actually gives you a huge benefit over a lot of people, because you know what can go wrong, you know what the wrong side of this looks like, and you're committed to being in an environment where that doesn't continue to happen. So, you know, your presence on a set, your presence in a project is a real benefit for everybody.
Yeah, I'll just maybe I might wrap this question up, but yeah, I mean, being, usually the only sex educator on a set, and as in the role of intimacy coordinator, it is interesting because I do feel like a few of us have touched on it already, but education is a key here. There's a lot of curiosity I experience when I'm on sets, crew members asking me questions that have to do with whether it be the intimate scene or them wanting to just confide in me and share their experiences around what they didn't learn growing up around sexuality or bodies or sexualizing thing or things, or just all things under that umbrella. And so, I think that those of us who do choose this profession as intimacy coordinators, we do have some compassion in this. We want to teach people, we want to be creative and do the work, work with performers, obviously, first and foremost, but it kind of goes along with it that you're on set and people want to ask you questions, and so, or share their experiences. And so I do feel like, yes, when I'm on sets, if someone has hired me to be on a set as an intimacy coordinator, I feel like, yay, like it feels like it's a little bit of a win because they want me there, versus like production not really wanting me there, which is a whole other conversation sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it is getting better in that way. I do feel like, I know we're going to talk more about this later, but productions aren't required to have us. I do feel like even just having the presence of an intimacy coordinator or a trauma professional or someone on a set, and those are two separate jobs, I don't mean to combine them, but that does change the energy on a set. In my experience, people are a little, they're paying attention to what they're doing a little bit more. And I think that feels like a way to shift things as well. So yeah.
Thank you all for such great and in-depth answers. One of WIF's core values is that parity is good business. Parity, inclusivity, and equal representation are non-negotiable requirements of sustainable media businesses. And that's something that I am constantly confronted by on the helpline. I think a lot of people, if they have heard about the helpline, think that the WIF helpline is a place to get very specific resources, which in some ways it is. We do offer legal and mental health referrals, but a lot of what goes on the helpline is also just helping people navigate like general career questions, especially after they have experienced the type of harms that we are talking about today. And I've seen the shift between earlier on in the Me Too movement, there were a lot more of our callers that were ready to leave the entertainment industry. And this is people who, and this is their dream, you know, but the harm was such that this is not a space where they feel safe. And it's not the space that they imagined they were working towards. And I can say as the years have progressed, it has moved. So I get less conversations with people who are asking about switching careers and more conversations with people who want to start their own production companies that are maybe a little bit more mindful of some of these practices or more up to date on, yeah, like, should you have an intimacy coordinator, and inviting people like Erin, and inviting people who are going to be working on the part of screen industry workers, as opposed to working on the part of you know, corporations and some of the bigger networks. So I know that our callers definitely want to be change makers, and many of our callers are like, what do I do? And yet we also very much need people that are in position of power to use that power and to produce change so that the work isn't entirely on survivors to advocate for themselves constantly. And so that sort of takes us to the next question, which is, what can stakeholders do for safer work environments? And so definitely one thing is inviting people like intimacy coordinators into sets, even if it isn't a requirement. But for folks that may not know, what are some resources that you all would suggest for people?
I'll jump in first if I can. This is Sarah. So a couple of things. When you have people on your helpline asking, like, what can I do? How can I get back into this? How can I start my own thing? Please send them our way, because we work in sort of two ways. We have a free, comprehensive 32-page toolkit that's available to anybody who wants it, that takes you step by step from development through release, with steps that filmmakers, stakeholders can take to be inclusive of survivors and create safer and more equitable work environments. It's really comprehensive. It's a really good roadmap. So for people who cannot afford to hire us as consultants, like, it's a really great resource to have when you're trying to build a safe and equitable set. We also have a survivor talent database where anyone who is identifies as a survivor who works in the entertainment industry can submit their information and their materials. And unlike other databases where they're searchable from like partners or people who pay a fee, all the information in our database is held within the org. So when we have a partner project or somebody come to us with like a job listing, either for cast or crew, what happens is we vet that listing, we get all the information, and then we send it out to our database. We'll post it on our socials and put it on our website as well, but it will end up in your inbox. And at that point, you can tell us, you can opt in with full consent, whether you'd like your contact information shared with the people who are looking for those, to fill those positions. You can tell us what material you'd like us to send. So we're really aware that it's hard to be in this industry if you faced any kind of abuse, and the last thing most people want to do is be on a list. You know, a lot of us have been blacklisted. So we're really protective of your information, and we work to make sure that you're getting access to opportunities rather than that people can like sort of find you and seek you out independently. This adds a layer of protection too, because again, we do a lot of vetting, but we can't know every situation. So it's possible that you see somebody attached to this project who you've had a problem with or you're aware of. And so you can either not choose to submit or even make us aware of the issue. And then we can try to use our position of relative power as a partner to see if there's a way to get that person off the project, or maybe we have to pull our support from it. So it's a really survivor-centric focus. But then for people who are making projects, like, you can come to us, we do comprehensive consulting, and we are attempting to structure it in a way so that the smaller projects that don't have a huge budget or survivor run projects get to have our services pro bono. As we make more partnerships with people who can pay, we'll be able to service more of the smaller projects, but we charge a percentage of the budget. And we come on board from the very beginning, and we do things like sensitivity reads, note sessions. We help create casting lists with survivor talent who has come forward publicly. We also help to draft language on casting notices and crew calls to indicate their partnership with us and that they're seeking survivors and how you can submit. We go through and we advocate for intimacy coordinators and vet intimacy coordinators. We advocate for trauma therapists to be on set. We're advocating right now, both within our organization and then me with the work that I do as a SAG-AFTRA member, to create sort of like a safety department on set, which would either be an individual or department of people who are outside of the traditional hierarchy of the set. And you can bring any safety complaint to them, a trip fall hazard, an exposed wire, somebody has sexually harassed you, whatever it is. And instead of going to the first AD, who is typically the person who that kind of stuff lands on, who's trying to make the day and like, you know, maybe not completely focused on safety, or the intimacy coordinator who is not there to do that job, but there to do the choreographic and communication job of keeping actors safe, then there's a dedicated department who can handle this. So that's not in place yet, but it is something that we're working on. And it goes on and on and on. You know, we advocate for having like screenings for the survivor community and direct feedback, especially if a project involves any kind of sexual violence in it. But there's a lot of tools available. We also, for survivors, free of charge, we provide media training. So if you're considering sharing your story publicly, going to the press, having to talk about anything that might be sensitive or complicated, you can come to us. We will explain to you what your rights are, how to talk to journalists, give you sort of a sense of journalists that we've worked with who we believe are more trauma informed. And we found this to be really useful. The projects that we consult on, typically about 25% of open roles go to survivors if they're working with us, which is a massive improvement. And we also have developed these trainings, which I mentioned briefly, with Suzannah and Futures Without Violence, and they are customized and they will span from being able to train the C-suite down to the PAs who are on set and create a really comprehensive, like, shared language and understanding for what is and is not acceptable. And so again, this is a way to not just prevent harm, but if something comes up, everybody has the same baseline understanding. And there's a general sense of where the boundaries are and what the expectations are. So hopefully if something comes up, it's an easier path to resolution and healing because everybody is on the same page coming in. There's a lot, but I just want to make it clear that we are really here to serve survivors, but we also have a whole suite of solutions for filmmakers and stakeholders who want to take this step. And it's really fun. We work in collaboration with all of the department heads, and it's a really creative process, and it ends up being really pleasant and fulfilling for everybody involved. So if you're on either side of that, please reach out anytime and we're happy to help.
I'm happy to jump in and talk a little bit about what we have available for folks. Like I said, the Hollywood Commission is committed to using the data in order to respond. And some of the things we also have a toolkit for employers and workers. Sarah Ann's work is very tailored towards survivors, and which is really specific and important. And ours is a little more general. So because we are focused on eliminating harassment, discrimination, and bias in the industry. So we're looking at all of those issues across the industry and how it's impacting communities, along with those toolkits that you can find on Hollywood Commission's website. We also do trainings and education. So we have a inclusive harassment-free set that we do for folks, as well as a bystander intervention. Something that people wanted to know was, when I witness it, what do I do? So we give people the skill set to be able to intervene on behalf or figure out what their style is to be able to be in support of the person who is experiencing harm. And then we just are in the process of developing Respect on Set, which is for independent productions who often don't have an HR infrastructure. And this program is in collaboration with IATSE, their low budget agreement, in order to build the support and the scaffolding that smaller productions need. And then MyConnects, the organization that I now am housed under. And MyConnects is a response to folks, one, being retaliated against, wanting to report things, but not knowing how. So MyConnext has 3 features. One is a reporting platform, which allows people to report their experiences anonymously. You can also report with your identifying information, but the unique feature is that you can communicate with an administrator anonymously, you can file reports anonymously, you can also submit a report on person A who caused harm, and that report will be held pending until another report on same person who caused harm to another person is submitted. And both of those reports go out because sometimes there's power in numbers and people feel more comfortable coming forward if there are other people coming forward. So that's the reporting platform. And there are 5 organizations that will be implementing when we launch in the next few weeks. And that's DGA, IATSE, WGA, US-based US-based Netflix productions and selected US-based Amazon productions. So anybody working within those spaces, a member of those spaces, they can access this reporting platform, and anyone who is part of SAG can get to their SAG reporting platform from our reporting platform. We want to make sure that people have all the doors open. And the beauty of this reporting platform is that the technology behind it is called the data locker, meaning that only the user can see the information, manage the information, submit the information, and they can stay anonymous the whole entire time. The other piece are resources for folks in the community. And the third piece is the Ombuds office. And the Ombuds, this is my new role, is going to listen in a confidential, safe place. And it may seem really simple, and it is, right? There's no connection to any studio, any streamer, any union, any guild. It's an independent organization. There's no identifying information collected on anybody. I have no vested interest in anybody making a decision one way or another. I do have a vested interest in people having all of their options. And that's what's really important, that people know what their options are and what's available to them. So those are some of the things that we're working on now, and amazing things to come in the future.
Thank you. I do want to give Erin and Suzannah an opportunity to respond, but I do see that somebody asked you to reiterate some of the information about reporting anonymously in our Q&A section. So I'm just wondering if you could state, like, if this is somebody that wants to track that information for themselves, like, how should they go about doing that?
Okay, so I believe the question you're asking about, Lupe, is what are the groups you just listed, the ones where you can report anonymously? Yeah, so the groups are the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, the Directors Guild of America, DGA, IATSE, which is the International Association of Theatrical Stage Employees. I did it. US-based Netflix productions, so all of the US-based Netflix productions. If you're on one of those productions, you're going to be able to access the reporting platform through your call sheet, because there's going to be a link or a QR code that you'll be able to see. And Amazon US-based productions, not all of them, some of them. With the unions and guilds, you will be able to access this reporting platform through your member login. So you will go to the WGA, log into your portal, and you'll be able to find it there. And my email is Lillian, Lillian, at myconnects.org. Happy to answer other questions.
Can we
I also
put
just wanted,
some of this in the chat? Is that
yeah,
possible? Someone, could we do that? Thank you.
I don't know if the chat is accessible, but I wanted to add, Hire Survivors will be advocating with partner companies and production companies to also participate in MyConnects as it continues to grow. But for anyone who doesn't have access to that through their guild or their employer, SAG-AFTRA does have a reporting line for like member-to-member complaints or things that come up. It's available on the website. If you're a member, the number's on your card. but also there's a nonprofit called Voices in Action. It's not specific to the entertainment industry, but it is was started by a Weinstein survivor, and it is a similar opportunity to make a report, a protected report, and also they have a matching system similar to MyConnect. So until this is widely adopted, if you are interested in something like that, there are some other tools out there that are similar. But yeah, definitely the MyConnects, I think, is going to be really transformational for people to be able to make these kinds of reports in a way that they feel safe and won't be retaliated against.
And if anyone forgets, you can call WIF helpline as well.
Yes. I was going to jump in and state that. And, you know, just to maybe clear up some points for anybody who hasn't called. And I know that calling a helpline or calling some of these organizations in itself can be intimidating if you don't necessarily know what to expect. Our helpline is completely anonymous. We store minimal information, and the information that we do store is kept completely safe. Only those of us on the helpline are looking at it and able to access it for just the sake of supporting repeat callers. But typically what we do is a pretty simple questionnaire to make sure that you're calling the correct resource. If somebody is in more immediate need, or you know, if they're facing an immediate harm, might make more sense to call something like 911 or an emergency line. But assuming that's not the case, then we go from there and basically just simple questions. Do you work in the screen industries? Are you calling on behalf of yourself or someone else? Because you can call on behalf of someone else. We often get callers who just simply want to know what opportunities are available to them in terms of speaking to HR or speaking to people on a production. So we can help you think through language that you might use. We can help you structure how you might go about holding a conversation and think about considerations that might be there if you are disclosing. Our helpline started specifically for the sake of addressing sexual harassment. However, we very quickly expanded because often sexual harassment is very intersectional, and it became impossible for us to talk about sexual harassment without also talking about other issues that people were facing, such as age discrimination, racial discrimination, ableism, all of these things. And so we really tried to help everybody that calls our helpline in some way, which means that even if we really aren't a great fit, we will help direct you to a better fit. But oftentimes, you know, if there's a question we don't have an immediate answer to, it will not be a no, it'll be a let me call you back. And that often presents opportunities for us to form other coalitions if that's not a resource that we already have in our roster, which of course is beneficial to us as well. We are survivor-led, meaning that it is really up to the caller where the call goes. People can give as much detail as they'd like. Sometimes it's somebody's first time ever talking about a harm that has occurred and they really feel the need to share with somebody. And if that's the case, we are here to listen and to provide support. Some people don't want to give very much information at all. And that's also not necessarily necessary from our point of view and what we're providing in order to move forward. So somebody can call and say, I'd like an attorney referral for these reasons, not name any names, not give specific details, and they can still get an attorney referral. And we also don't push legal or any other sort of outcome. Even if you receive an attorney referral, you can utilize that attorney referral to once again think about language that you might use, or to do something like help you draft a contract or help you think about negotiating a certain situation. All of our attorneys and all of our resources in general have been vetted by WIF to make sure that we're not sending our callers somewhere where they're going to be pushed into actions that they aren't comfortable with. Yeah, Sarah Ann.
Yeah, that's something else I wanted to say is our organization also does not require any kind of disclosure. The most you'll ever be asked is whether you identify as a survivor, and our partnered projects also are not allowed to ask any details about the nature of your abuse, your experiences, anything like that. And I want to really applaud WIF for the actions that they've taken with their helpline, but also one of only 2 companies and organizations so far who has sort of heeded our call to create opportunities for survivors to self-identify. So on applications now for your programs, there's a question about experiencing sexual violence where people can opt in to answer that question. They also link out to us as a resource. And the other company that's done that is Hustle Up, which is a like a networking app in the industry, and they have an optional demographic checkbox. So that's another big thing, is like normalizing this. So many people have experienced this, and it's not anything that people should feel shame about, and it's okay to seek community, and also important to acknowledge the impacts that abuse have on you, and it does put you in a historically marginalized group of people. And our work, you know, I'm so glad people brought up like intersectionality and inclusion, because our work by necessity means that more BIPOC folks, more queer folks, more disabled folks are also getting opportunities, because most survivors are multiply marginalized, and it's a really diverse group of people. So there's really just excellent work happening in this direction, and the organizations and the people that really can help you are the ones who are not going to ask you to disclose anything and are not going to pressure you to report or not report or take any kind of action. So I can confidently say everyone on this call is aligned with that. And so if you ever are seeking help, definitely reach out to these orgs and these folks.
Thank you. Suzannah or Erin, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just briefly, I just, you know, I would refer people to y'all. I mentioned earlier that I volunteered with an organization called Strength United. You know, Lupe, you did mention at one point that the WIF call line, oh man, the call line, hotline, that you can refer, I think you said this, you can refer people if they're in urgent or immediate danger. So I would just say that, like, if, you know, if anyone watching is in something that's a little more urgent, and a resource, and I don't work with them anymore, but a resource like Strength United, their 24-hour hotline, that gives resources to people who could be experiencing something like sexual violence. They have specifically, if something with a minor is happening, and like you said before, it doesn't have to be you experiencing it, you could be calling on behalf of someone else. So yeah, I mean, I just want to make some space for if it's something that is more aggressive that's happening and more urgent, that a resource like, it's called Strength United. I'll put it in the answer part of the Q&A too. But that one, sorry, real quick, that one, it does focus more on callers who live in the Valley. I'm pretty sure there are other organizations like that in other parts of Los Angeles, but that's the one I worked with. So
I can actually give those. So you've got East LA Women's Center as well as Peace Over Violence. Peace Over Violence also serves in the Valley and downtown. That's not just niche knowledge. I did live in LA for a while. I'm on the East Coast now. I think in terms of, you know, what we provide, Workplaces Respond, which is a national resource center. We are federally funded through a cooperative agreement with the Office on Violence Against Women. So everything we provide is free, and that can be as simple as policy review, helping people develop protocols, helping people develop relationships with local crisis centers, so that they know where to send survivors for help and for support, all the way to, you know, helping develop survivor-driven, employee-driven curricula that they can then implement. So we do kind of that full life cycle range of engagement, from the lowest hanging fruit to like the most complex that you can get into. The one thing that I did want to caution is just with people wanting to have a positive action and be a bystander who intervenes, one of the things that can be difficult in that case is a lot of people don't necessarily know what to do and can sometimes make situations worse for the survivor, particularly with marginalized communities, particularly Black and Brown communities, and calling 911 when they're witnessing something can actually cause a lot more harm, up to and including murder, which we have seen multiple times. And so I just want to be cautious as we talk about 911 as a place to call, not necessarily for bystanders. So be very cautious when making that phone call. The other thing I want to say is for anyone who wants to know what actions you can take, that is also training and technical assistance that we do, but helplines are called helplines and not hotlines for a reason. They are accessible for you as well. So they are accessible for somebody who is trying to help a survivor, not just for the survivor. So if there's a situation that's occurring, you aren't sure what to do, you can call a helpline and walk through the scenario and actually get advice for the best way to intervene in a way that's not going to cause more harm to the survivor.
Thank you so much for stressing that distinction, which is a very important distinction. So I want to wrap up our questions and the part that we had planned. I do have one final question, but just this as a cue that in the next like 5-ish minutes, we will move into audience Q&A. I do see some questions have already come in, but if anyone has a question that they haven't yet typed, feel free to start doing that as we're finalizing this question here. So obviously we know that this is not just an entertainment industry issue. So what does this look like on a fundamental level? And how do we shift culture as a whole, or what is at least our role in shifting culture as a whole, because it's such a big endeavor. And in that like process, simultaneously, how do we create open spaces for people who have caused harm? How do we create the open spaces for the people who have caused harm to talk about and learn and explore maybe some difficult questions that they have that can sometimes not feel safe to discuss in even panels like this or survivor-led spaces?
I think I can take the first part of the question, at least from our perspective. We are called Hire Survivors Hollywood, but our actual nonprofit is called Hire Survivors because the entire intention of our work is to be able to build a roadmap that works in the entertainment industry and then be able to apply it to other industries and other communities. And we do believe that people who work in this industry work in a particularly vulnerable industry, and it's not the only one out there, but there are, risk factors and situations that workers are asked to be put in, doing nude scenes, doing intimate scenes that isn't common in a common workplace. So we believe what we've learned and what we've built is applicable to other workplaces. We've done some conversations with other corporate entities, and they feel that there's a big crossover here. So I think typically the nature of this work is not necessarily specific to one community or one industry. It can be widely applied. But one thing that's really special about what we do is that as artists and as filmmakers and as people who work in this industry, we do create the culture that people understand and process and sort of buy into. And so a big part of what we do at Hire Survivors is advocating for authentic storytelling and making sure that stories are actually being told by people who have this lived experience, and that we're seeing actual disabled folks on screen, and we're not having people play roles that they shouldn't be playing. And we can subtly and slowly, or quite dramatically, start changing a society that's, rife with rape culture and misogyny and victim blaming, and start shifting that just by the stories that we tell. And I'm not only talking about issues films, I'm talking about action films and buddy comedies and everything in between, because all of this has like dialogue and interpersonal relationships and what can be microaggressions and things that are just really subtle that aren't caught. So we have this gift and this responsibility to actually shape the culture with the work that we create. So that's another way that we're also empowered to do that is, yes, we have to wait for the green light, and we have to wait for the financing sometimes, or sometimes we go out and make something on the fly with our friends. But whatever it is, every piece of art that you create that is a better version of society, a more honest version of society, and actually showing people for who they are and how they live, and opening people's hearts and minds to different experiences, we are changing things through that creative work. So that's the thing that always excites me and like lights me up is, yes, we have these structural systemic changes that we have to make, and we're all working towards that, but also in our creativity and in our storytelling, we get to be a part of that too. We're sharing a whiteboard, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, I think Suzannah.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to, but ready to draw.
I thought Suzannah is going to
but
answer.
Lily, it's all
I
you.
was very excited for what was
the
coming.
response. I'll share that the work of the Hollywood Commission today is led day by day, every day, by Anita Hill. If you're not sure who Anita Hill or haven't heard of her name, I would encourage you to research her. For me, as a young college student, I'm dating myself, watching her testify, and she was the first person to do this. And it took a Black woman. I want to put that point on it. It took a Black woman to do it. That we know that we're in it for the long game, right? And I think that was one moment in history that changed significant things. And I think today we're led by her because, like Sarah Ann said, that our ability to create images, to create art, shapes our social fabric. It shapes our narrative. It influences us and our unconscious in ways that we can't understand. And if we can do that in spaces that are transformational, that center those at the margins, and we can do that in a way that's ethical, then we're going to transform our nation. And sometimes nations are transformed through policy, through legislature. Sometimes they're transformed through art and images and poetry and all of the things that reflect who we are. Today, we're not reflecting what we need to reflect. Today, we need to reflect a better society that, has destroyed patriarchy and has destroyed violence, has destroyed poverty, so I think sort of that's how culture is changing, and we are cogs. And this small shift that we're making is going to be significant. So when my kids take over the work, their journey is just a little shorter than ours was. So I think that's what I'll share.
I love that. I don't feel like you dated yourself because that means you were dating me. So we'll take that out. I think, echoing all of that, one of the reasons that I am really excited about being involved in this space is specifically that media shapes what we do. The reason I went back to school to study gender, media, and culture was specifically because I was working with young teenagers in LA, actually. And what I found is that the media that they were consuming and creating was really what was shaping their concepts of a healthy relationship and their concepts around gender. And so for me, being able to help the industry that is shaping that is the key. But it's also, you know, working at all of those different levels at the same time. So you're working at different levers, right? You are working on some of the policies. And one of the things that I always say is, like, if policy worked on its own, the 1964 Civil Rights Act would have worked. But there was no education that went along with that. So we also have to be changing the mental models and the individual behaviors that people are doing. And that can be through relational aspects, where we're examining power dynamics, where we're actually deconstructing some of those things and really looking at what those systemic barriers are for people. Not only to survivors trying to access employment and access services, but also to everyone trying to even access the industry. And so really trying to eliminate those barriers through all of those different levers going in the same direction at the same time. And that takes a whole group of people. And I'm going to attempt to thread the needle to your second question, which goes back to that media creating kind of the culture that we're in. And the specific thing that I worked on in my dissertation was looking at how the media constructs masculinity after a mass shooting occurs. And the thing that I learned, and you're getting the short version of my dissertation, is it doesn't. It erases any agentic subject. It creates a mental health discourse. It creates the gun discourse, but it doesn't actually talk about a human that our society created going into a place and harming so many individuals. And that is our problem to solve. And so when we talk about, you know, how do we create this space for people to learn, that is also working on different levels. And that's not going to fall on people who are the most marginalized. That should fall on people who hold the same identities that I do for the most part. And really going in and giving space to, like, I'm not going to judge you. You are a product of how you grew up, but I need to know the most ridiculous thing that you think right now, because eventually that could end up harming a lot of people. And so if I create that space for them to really open up, then I can have a really frank conversation with them about, hey, have you ever thought of it this way? And considering I had a lot of success with athletes that are private institution in rural Nebraska, I would say that approach was pretty successful. So I think that it's really making sure that the right people are in those spaces to have those conversations, that we're not relying on survivors to constantly be essentially battling these really harmful beliefs, but that we're putting the right people in those spaces. We're providing them with resources and with a map to where we're going, so that they can not push people with them, and not even drag, but walk alongside them as they grow in those spaces.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. I mean, everyone said so many great things. My thing is always education. And again, I also, you know, maybe like Suzannah, I get a lot of people who are very curious, and feel comfortable enough. I feel grateful that I guess I'm somebody that people feel comfortable enough to ask squeamish questions sometimes, like sometimes when I don't necessarily have the space to answer the question, but I know it's my calling in some way to be that person in this world. So you know, and Suzannah, I actually wanted to say too, I appreciate you saying that the labor shouldn't fall on you didn't say exactly these words, but people of color. I do feel like it does need to be a collaboration. You know, it takes all of us. Like somebody might prefer to hear it from me than you, or hear it from you rather than me. And so it really does take all of us. It can't be one group of people with a certain identity who do this work. But I appreciate the labor piece, because I definitely personally have had a lot of experiences around these topics where there's just an assumption that I could do it. And it's like, hello, what about Erin's self-care? But yeah, I mean, you know, so much of what I deal with around sexuality, and I did see there was a question around intimacy coordination in the chat. It might overlap here a little bit, but you know, so much of my work is about what people have watched in a TV show or a movie, and they're trying to emulate. And so, you know, a lot of, you know, putting my sex educator hat on, you know, I teach a lot of workshops around a lot of different topics around kink and BDSM and non-monogamy and a lot of different topics. And so, you know, I think people are just trying to understand what is quote unquote correct, because they see these images. And if you didn't grow up learning a lot of these things, or how to respect boundaries, or how somebody enjoys being touched, or that, oh, you should have a conversation with someone about how they might want to be touched or hugged or whatever, or all the things, right? It's like, how do you know? We assume people just know this. And so I do feel like there is a huge correlation for me around sex education and how it's terrible in this country when we're talking about a lot of the things we're talking about. It's like there's not even a fundamental baseline consensus of like 101 level education around a lot of this, you know, for like America, let's say. You know, depends on where you grew up, what city, what state, like what school is what level of schooling you've had. So yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts about it, but I mean, the cultural shift for me is that education's the way. And, you know, we're privileged to work in the entertainment industry. So if we can have influence on, like Sarah Ann said earlier, truthful stories being told that are authentic to people's identities, to actually what's happening, to how someone's body works, to how someone's body can actually move and function, but it's not a theatrical display that's not realistic, depending on the project. Like that, I feel like is gonna change culture, you know, having realistic ideas and conversations with performers, and stories being told that just have some basis in that people aren't using that as their guide in actual life. So they're disconnected from how they're interacting with actual human beings.
Thank you all. Such great responses. Suzannah, I'm dissertating right now. And so every time you say dissertation, I'm like, what?
I'm so sorry to bring that into your space.
No, side note. But that does remind me, this is still in the works and not like something that we have been out publicly about, but with WIF, I have been working on a workshop series that is looking at transforming work culture in general, where the first session would be a crash course on what are the systemic and institutional issues that are also responsible for this, on top of the vulnerable work that happens in the screen industries. And I think that inherently gets us to a place where we have to consider the fact that survivors can cause harm, and people who have caused harm can be survivors, and these are not static identities, but often flow into each other for various reasons. And it also enables us to talk about actions that an individual may have taken or harm they may have caused within that systemic, broader context, so that we can hold them accountable while not necessarily demonizing that individual or having one individual bear the entire weight of a system that creates and upholds that type of behavior. So that's something that is really meaningful to us, and that we are working towards making public and, creating as many of these opportunities for education, with education being an important component of this work. I do want to shift to the Q&A, and make some space in our final 15 minutes for questions that folks have posed in the chat. I'll start us at that bottom question, Erin, since I did see you mention the questions around intimacy coordination. And so I'm kind of going to tie in the last two questions I'm seeing, which is, how can you personally feel safe and comfortable while doing an intimate scene? Is there any type of tip or advice to feel okay to do a scene like that? And then in relation to that, we have one commenter discussing potential retaliation for seeking information about getting an intimacy coordinator and calling SAG. So just Erin, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, no, thank you for these questions. It's an ongoing thing around feeling safe and comfortable doing an intimate scene. I will say, whether I'm working with an A-list actor or on a low budget something, everyone has nerves. So just normalizing the feeling of nervousness, because it's not a normal scenario with crew around, even if it's limited crew. One thing that an intimacy coordinator is really great that we do that's really helpful is, we do treat it like, I grew up dancing. So there's a level of like working through beats. So, walking through the beats of the scene. Okay, we're going to be here. We're going to be here. We're going to be here. So making it more, how do I want to say this? Less about kissing and touching, more about the blocking of the scene. So that can be helpful too. It's like, okay, beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, for example. I also have, for the sake of time, there's different touch exercises that we can facilitate. I like to use certain exercises that use a 1 to 10 scale. If there's something, let's say, where there's maybe something more forceful in a scene, we practice like, okay, let's try grabbing each other on a 1, meaning 1 being not super aggressive, 10 being the most aggressive, and see how that feels for us. So there's different exercises you can do around that kind of thing. Some of it might be like getting to know each other as performers beforehand, like something where you can create some sort of connection, even if it's just like a friendly connection. There's a production outside. I don't know if you can hear them cheering, but anyway. But so all this to say, there's a lot of different ways to help lessen the awkwardness and make things feel a little more comfortable. In a perfect world, I'm working with a director that wants my feedback. I've worked on several projects where a director isn't sure why there's no chemistry with 2 performers. And so that's when it can be really interesting as a collaboration between intimacy coordinator and director. It's like they want to hear my feedback. They want advice on how to make things better. So that's the long and short of it. And then the second question, I forgot to mention, I'm on the LA Local Sexual Harassment Committee in SAG, yes, with Sarah Ann, yes. And, things like this have come up quite a bit around if a performer requests an intimacy coordinator, even though that's obviously their right. And, producers will use best efforts was the blurb put in the new contract, TV theatrical contract. So there's no real guarantee, that I feel like the onus is still on the performer and the performer is still vulnerable. Even though we're saying best efforts and even though we're normalizing the idea of intimacy coordinators, I still feel like it feels to me like a performer still might feel a little nervous around it. So I want to normalize that. There's a lot of things I really feel like we should be normalizing around this experience. It shouldn't just be like, oh, well, now intimacy coordinators are here, so everything's going to be great. It's like, no. Like, I get it. It's still a newish thing for a lot of productions. A lot of times the productions I've worked on, I'm the first intimacy coordinator they've ever worked with. So it's like, while I'm doing the job, I'm explaining the job. So having said that, I would say, us in the SAG, in the sexual harassment committee, we're trying to find ways to make it easier and lessen the harm around asking for an intimacy coordinator. And I know Sarah Ann has things to add to this. So I think that's all I'll say for now, but just know that it's a work in progress, and all of us are working very hard to make it so that it's a little less clunky, the process.
Yeah, I'm so glad Erin spoke to that. I'll give a little like insidery baseball about the SAG-AFTRA of it all and the intimacy coordinators. I'm on the LA local and the national sexual harassment prevention committees. I'm the chair of the intimacy coordinator subcommittee. And the current language in our TV theatrical states best efforts from the producer. That is actually legal language. It isn't just like, oh, we tried and failed. Sorry. They actually have to make the effort to seek out, vet, and hire an intimacy coordinator. Now, it's limited in our current contract to nude scenes and sex scenes. However, the performer has the right to request an intimacy coordinator for any scene that they feel it's necessary, and there is language in there that retaliation cannot happen. Now, having said all of that, does that mean that it won't or that you'll feel comfortable doing it? No, not necessarily. So one thing we're doing within the union right now is trying to push for more comprehensive language. Part of this, I think, is an education issue. I think in most people's heads, intimate scenes are sex scenes or nude scenes, but intimacy is anything that's physically intimate. So that could be familial intimacy, like having a child sit on your lap, medical intimacy, a medical procedure, someone being in a bath. It isn't just about sex and nudity. So helping to educate, the people within our union who are negotiating these things, and also our producers and our employers, is a really big part of it. And I'm working inside to try to get stronger language for the next contract that we're negotiating. And then hopefully that will apply to future contracts. But another thing that we can offer is if you're working on a project and you want there to be an intimacy coordinator and there isn't, you can reach out to Hire Survivors Hollywood, let us know, and we can go to the project and advocate for you, even if we're not consulting on it. We don't have to say that you're the ones who brought it to our attention, but we can say, hey, we've been made aware that there's some intimate work in this project. We don't know if you've identified an intimacy coordinator yet, but we're happy to come in and help facilitate that, help you vet people, help you put together some best practices for doing this. And that's something we're happy to offer. Right now, obviously, we want productions to be consulting with us so that they already know to do this. But if they're not, we're happy to help facilitate that. Another thing that we're planning to do, we just became a nonprofit very recently. So we only recently started being able to take donations, and we're hoping to have a lot of these partnerships, which will help fund our work. But one thing we eventually want to do is put together a scholarship for survivors, and particularly survivors who are multiply marginalized, to become intimacy coordinators. The barrier to access right now is quite large because the training is expensive. It's still, I think, Erin, you'll say the same is true. It's a little bit of the Wild West out there still. There's a lot of different training programs. People are still trying to figure it out. I'm not of the belief that we don't have enough intimacy coordinators to service the projects. I think they are out there. It's just about trying to make sure that we can find them and identify them and make sure they're a good fit for the projects. But we are working on trying to make this a more accessible career for people, trying to take some of the burden off of folks who would be really excellent at this work and help projects do this in a really non-painful way. We consulted on a project that had like a $3,000 budget, and we helped them to hire an intimacy coordinator. And we've also worked on projects that have a $30 million budget. So like anybody can do it. It's just about being able to access those resources and know that they're out there and know how to get them. So as much as we can be like a conduit or a buffer zone for you as an individual to help get what you deserve, like come to us, we will help you. And also report to the union. If you are in SAG-AFTRA and you do make a request and then you're fired or you're treated poorly or there's any sense of retaliation, do go to the union, tell them, but like also tell us so that we can put outside pressure on the union to hold the producers accountable too.
Thank you. As we are starting to wrap up, there were a few questions, I think similarly around retaliation, and retaliation is something that like can be difficult to tackle because it's difficult, like unless somebody is very explicitly telling you this is the way I am retaliating against you, it's a difficult thing to prove. And so I see comments about having credits diluted, which is, from my experience on the helpline, it's something that happens a lot. Credits being erased or titles demoted. and issues of people experiencing what they're calling union blacklisting, and of course, other forms of retaliation. And so to close this out, I'm just wondering if folks, other than contact hire survivors, and you certainly contact WIF and call the helpline, and we can connect you with some resources, but especially for folks who are having an issue with their union or who are not members of a union, what are resources out there for them to call?
I would say this is just a really practical thing that I encourage everyone to do, because as you mentioned, Lube, like retaliation can be explicit, but it can also be quite implicit. So keeping records of what happens, like taking contemporaneous notes, screenshotting things, after you get off a phone call, write down everything. If you're not in a state where you can just record without consent from the other person, because it's a state by state issue, like make notes about the call, send an email following up. We discussed this. Keep a paper trail, because these things are a lot of like your word against somebody else's, and if you have a consistent narrative and you have timestamps and everything, it can help you if you do choose to make a report or make a complaint. Another thing is that unions are great and they're made up of people. So sometimes you go to make a report or go to make a complaint or seek help, and the person you happen to interface with, even though everybody's supposed to be trauma informed and trained, it's not ideal. Like, you don't have an ideal interaction. So again, take notes about that. Call back, ask to speak to somebody else, speak to a different department, reach out to the legal department at the union and say, look, I'm just trying to get help. Here's the response I got. That's not what we're supposed to be getting as union members. That's not the support I need. And just make it clear that something is happening. The fear of retaliation is very real, and not everybody will feel comfortable doing any of this. But if you're in the process of trying to report something or make a complaint and you're meeting roadblocks or you're getting further traumatized by people, you're already in it. So like pushing past that barrier to get it escalated and to draw attention to it, I think is typically a really good path to take. Again, reach out. Like WIF, I know, does legal recommendations. We do the same. We have sort of a small battery of law firms that we know help survivors in these issues. And you can also always do like an intro call with a lawyer for free, give them some sense of what you're dealing with, and they can give you some guidance about what options might be available to you. You can make EEOC complaints outside of, most of us don't have an HR department. Lots of us aren't in a union. So there are a lot of steps you can take, but also like reach out to community, find survivor communities that exist, actor communities that exist, like group chats that you have with people who are trusted, and start talking about the problems you're facing. And I have watched during the strike and after the strike, people really join together to address issues like contractual obligations that aren't being upheld or are being manipulated after our most recent negotiations. People write letters to our legal department, get them on the phone, start advocating, getting language changed. There's really strength in numbers. And I mean, that's the thing for me, is like when we're alone, when we feel alone, it's so much scarier. And the retaliation isn't fake. Like, don't let people convince you there isn't a risk to any of this. There is. I'm not going to lie about that. I've dealt with it myself. I'm still dealing with it as an artist. But when you can come together in community with other people or utilize the resources that already exist to act as a shield to protect you, you have more power and you have more ability to really push these changes through. And like I mean, I don't know, Erin, I don't want to like get your DMs filled, but people like Erin and I who do work inside of the unions as committee members, I'm also an elected delegate, like bring your concerns to us and we can anonymize them and bring them to the committees we're on and say, hey, here's something we hear that's happening. Here's an issue that's a pain point for our members. Here's something that needs to be fixed amongst staff so this doesn't keep happening. There are people out there fighting for you, and you can lean on us. You can become part of that fight. And we can really I've watched the change happen. I've watched individual people just take that step to go, hey, this isn't okay. And then changes start happening.
Yeah, I'm usually that person like, hey, this isn't okay. And people love me or hate me for it, but oh well. But yeah, no, I mean, if we don't know what's happening, like I have my experience of what I see and what I've experienced. So it's important for us to know more of the stories and more of what's happening out there. It's very important. And it's just, as it can be a scary thing to confide in somebody about the thing that's happening. But really, if with that comes the change, really.
Oh, and one other thing, if you're in California, there's new legislation that passed called AB 933. It was written by Victoria Burke, who's a survivor and a lawyer herself. and she's trying to pass it in all different states, but it protects you from defamation lawsuits for sharing your story of abuse. So for any survivor who's afraid of, telling their story publicly, whether that means going to the press or telling a friend or sharing it on your Facebook or on Twitter, there are now really comprehensive protections for you where your abuser cannot further traumatize and control you by slapping a defamation lawsuit on you simply for telling your story. So again, that's AB 933. If you have other questions about it, you can reach out to us and we can direct you to some resources. But yeah, it's like the pincer movement of attacking things from within the creative field and within the union space and legislatively and on a community-based level. And like, it's going to change. It really is. And it's getting there slowly, but it's happening. So this is a heavy conversation. There's a lot to process, but I hope everybody can walk away like feeling hopeful because good changes are happening.
I know we're like right at time, so I'm going to keep this really brief, especially because that was such a lovely, lovely moment. Survivor advocates do exactly that word, right? They advocate for you. And so all of these like different calls that you may feel you have to make, an advocate can help you with those. And an advocate can be there to share your story over and over and over because we know what that can do for folks. So I just want to highly recommend making sure that, you're using that system. Workplaces Respond, we are also funded to work with unions. So bring us in to work on some of these things. I am desperately trying to put together a webinar about bringing these pieces into collective bargaining. We'll see how that works out.
We're trying to get you in there at SAG, Suzannah. We're working on
it. So that work is happening. And I just want to really say, reach out to the advocates because they're going to be there to help you through all of this.
Thank you all so much. Lilly, did you have anything you wanted to add before we close out?
Off after Sarah Ann. She said it all. We're good to go. Just thank you.
Amazing. Thank you all again. And thanks everyone for joining. As mentioned in the chat, I know there were a lot of resources that we talked about. It's hard to keep up with that information. So we're going to make sure to post all of those resources along with the recording. But always as a second option, the WIF line is open for any questions that you might have, including simply reiterating some of this information. We are here to help and we are happy to help. Hope you all have a great rest of your evening, and thank you for joining our panel today.
Thank you all so much.
Bye. Thank you.